Good morning, welcome to our Politico breakfast here in The Hague. We're here for the NATO summit. All the leaders of the 32 members of NATO are meeting just down the road. We're coming to you live, Politico breakfast, coming to you live. Timing for this event could not be more momentous. As we've all seen in the headlines every day in recent days, this is a crucial moment for this organization, for this, the biggest ever military alliance in history. They're meeting here, it's crunch time. We're talking about every country supposedly trying to sign up for a 5% of GDP spending budget. We'll be talking about that a little bit later with our panel here on the stage. We have some wonderful guests, friends of Politico, friends of Munich Security Conference, and also of the Klingendale Institute. We're in this incredible space called the Hus at NATO. We'd really like to thank McKinsey, who have made it possible for us this morning and throughout the day today to bring together some of the top minds on military affairs, international affairs, and politics. Soon we'll have a panel of people from the industry speaking, but first I'd like to invite to the stage Fredrik Dahlqvist, who's the senior partner from McKinsey. He's going to join me on the stage and we're going to have a quick conversation about these momentous events. So Fredrik, please.
Thank you, Jamil. Thank you, sir.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
It's great to have you here.
Great to be here.
So I know that McKinsey is doing a load of work now with companies, with governments on security. It's become a top priority for every country, obviously, in the world right now, but particularly here in Europe.
Yes.
Particularly because of what's the discussions around NATO. And I'm interested in what McKinsey brings, what McKinsey is offering, and what you in particular, because I think this is a quite new role for you, overseeing defense. And I know one thing about you, which is that you were a special forces soldier in Sweden. So
many years ago.
I guess that qualifies you. But why don't you tell me a bit about your qualifications and also about what McKinsey's doing with your clients on this area?
Thank you, Jamil. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for welcoming us to this wonderful occasion to talk about this important topic. So, for you who are not familiar with us as McKinsey, we're a global organization. Our sort of mission over the last, actually almost 100 years, we're like at 99.5 years at the moment, which we're a little bit proud of, is to really help our clients solve the toughest problems, you know, when it gets a bit difficult. And we think this is a moment in Europe in particular where we might be able to make a difference together with our clients. So our work in this space is widespread. It covers decades of work across the typical pillars, you know, societal and, you know, even sort of economic growth, across the military sort of industrial side, as well as the government side of the house. So we work across the space, but it's really a moment that's quite unprecedented, honestly. I think one observation, if you allow me, is that, you know, it's easy to be, how should I put it, almost like accusative to Europe in this moment. But I think it's also important to have the context around it. But if we back out, Jamil, to 1992, and think about where we were at that moment, we're all celebrating peace, right?
The end of history.
The end of history. And but we, you know, started to bring us, you know, briskly back to reality. But if we were to sort of baseline our focus and spend on defense and societal sustainability, you can talk about, you know, either a sort of deficit or, you know, a peace dividend of somewhere between 1.5 trillion or even 9 trillion. It's a lot of money, right? 9 trillion would be if we would baseline against the trajectory we were on in 1992. 1.5 billion would be if you would, you know, baseline against the 2% NATO target. So we just have a bit of a catch-up to do. And I think it all feels important for us to try to get that done together.
So now we're talking about not 3%, which was what we were talking about a couple of years ago. Now we're talking about 5%, although some countries want some get-out clause from that. How do you take these budgets and translate that into real capabilities? Like when your clients are coming to you and governments are coming to you, when your big clients are coming, how do you take that and say, this is how we should deploy that money?
Yeah, thank you. So our sort of narrative around the whole space, Jamil, is a little bit around, so we have a challenge and an opportunity to move together in Europe. I am actually really encouraged by all of these countries coming together this week in The Hague and in general. But we do have sort of a Gordian knot to solve, if you will. How can we get, or how can ministries of defense get to conviction on how they really want to invest in defense? How can they procure effectively? How do we build the industrial capacity to produce? How do we get private capital to participate, which I know we'll talk about perhaps in a bit? And how do we fill the more than 1 million, mostly, blue-collar labor jobs needed to really produce that material and so on, and even in our military organizations? So I think it's just sort of perhaps the biggest paradigm shift and task that this region has seen in a very long time. And frankly, that's why I'm spending all of my time in this sector at the moment. So I know I avoided your question. Apologies.
No, not at all.
But I think it's important to say, right? I just want to laud the region for everything we're doing and recognize the audacity of the task at hand.
So defense companies have this backlog. It can sometimes be like years, like 6 years of backlog in some of these companies. So how do you accelerate that production? Now that we have the commitment of the budgets, we've got the government saying we're going to spend, how do you then translate that? Like how do you get industry to catch up? And especially, I would say, when you have such different standards amongst all these different countries. I'm really interested in that problem.
100%. So let me hit on that first. And we published a bit on this. And by the way, there's a bit of collateral around the room and some QR codes if you're interested. We do, try to be, non-partisan, fact-based in what we bring out there. And try
As do we.
I know. That's why we're having this conversation, I believe.
Partnership.
No, but I think it's important, right, to bring some facts into the room. But to answer your question, so I agree with you. Backlogs are increasing. And fragmentation of platforms is certainly a problem. To give you a few examples, so if you contrast, and I know this is unfair, right? But if you contrast the US to Europe, we have 16 main battle tanks in Europe versus 1 in the US.
And tanks are probably obsolete anyway. So
I'm not so sure about that,
okay,
but I think it's more the combination. But we have 24 howitzer system versus 2 in the US. It can go on, frigates, destroyers. I think the issue with that is not necessarily that we don't love local European innovation and R&D and product development. It just leads to waste. We think about ourselves as a continent and a region, need to protect ourselves. It just leads to a lot of inefficiency. And I know this is incredibly hard to solve. And the attempts at doing this have been, partially successful. But I think it's an honorable, how should I put it, an important ambition to have. Having said that, to answer your question, how do we go from budgets to actual delivery? I would say, if you think about the capabilities of this region, we've always had some of the most capable automotive players in Europe. This sort of high quality, high complexity manufacturing, we solved and sometimes borrowed learnings from Japan. If you think about lean production, capability building, and all of that. strengthening the supplier base and bringing suppliers closer to us. But I also think, can we play to the region's strength in terms of thinking about, for perhaps Eastern Europe, that's already producing, that has, I would argue, some labor advantages and the skill set that might be helpful to really accelerate this. So it's sort of that cross-region. I know it's hard to do, but it would be exciting to explore, I think.
It's definitely one vision that we hope can happen. So that's about bringing private industry into, I guess, the defense supply chain. What about private? You did touch on it. Private capital. How do you mobilize? By definition, defense budgets are provided by the state. So how do you get that kind of private investment, private capital to join? And I know that was previously your key role at McKinsey. For many years. You were advising private equity and sovereign wealth funds and people like that. So how do you get those people to invent? Because, if we just go back 2-3 years ago, if I just think 2-3 years ago, defense was in one of those categories that was not investable for some major investors. And how is that changing, and how do you mobilize that?
Yeah. So there's still, folks are still hesitating to lean in. But the industry is moving. My conviction is that private capital of all sorts will be absolutely critical to make this happen. Not just because capital is needed, but when we do the numbers, and these are rough cut numbers, we think that at least, call it, a handful of 100 billion will be needed from private capital to carry this through. And for my former and still clients, right, this is also a huge opportunity to deploy, which I think is the dynamic we really want, right? Why? Because, bringing private capital into the fold also allows for productivity. We know that when we have private enterprises included in this movement, productivity tends to increase. We get the incentives to grow. We get the incentives to attract talent, which is a critical challenge. However, we do still face challenges on what is ESG. Can we, how should I put it, have a conversation with the limited partners of the sort of traditional private capital side of the house to allow ourselves to invest in the space? And it's so broad, right? Dual use, civil infrastructure, there's so much needed, but judging off of the interest of the industry, this is going to be one of the absolutely, if not the biggest priority for the private capital industry going forward.
So it wouldn't be a panel about Europe if I didn't talk about innovation.
Yes.
Literally every panel I think I do at the moment talks about innovation and European innovation. One of the areas that I've actually noticed some innovation in the last few years in Europe is in defense tech. There are some of these companies which are coming up in Europe. Can you tell me a little bit about how you see those defense tech companies and whether you think that that's something that Europe has an edge? I mean, horrible as it is, the war in Ukraine is changing the nature of warfare, right? We're seeing it real time in the last few years. And I know for a fact that many of these companies, not just from Europe, are testing real time their equipment and their cutting edge technology. So how do you see that when it, not overall innovation, but innovation in this space?
Wonderful question. First of all, when we observe what's going on in the sort of war theaters at the moment, which are tragic and unfortunate, but still exist, I think we can learn a lot from the Ukraine. The integration of high-tech businesses directly into having conversation with battalion commanders in terms of what's actually working. We call it spiral product development with very, very rapid connection points between ministries of defense, the defense industrial base, high-tech players, hard to do.
And troops on the ground.
And troops on the ground, critically, right? Mm-hmm. Giving feedback to see, to give feedback on what actually works. It's a very stark difference to the product development we've known in Europe for many years. So I think we really need to learn from that, honestly. I mean, to take a step back, we sometimes too self-critical in Europe in terms of what we do. If we look at the VC and early stage investments into defense tech, it's been 5x'd in the last several years. And it stands now at 2.5-ish X. We keep comparing ourselves to the US for some reason, which is, close to what private capital sits at in general as a, multiple of or fraction of GDP. And so I think, honestly, it's a pretty impressive coming from a pretty modest starting point. But we still see that, which is true in general, we sort of struggle to raise the really big scale funds for DevTech. And I think maybe the unlock will be on the LP side. I think we need to find a way to promote defense as a part of ESG.
That's a nice line to finish on. Thank you so much, Fredrik, and thank you to our partners at McKinsey. We're going to have a bit of breakfast now, and then we're going to welcome our next panel in a second. But thank you so much.
Lovely.
Fredrik.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.